I've seen break-ins before, plenty of them. Most are messy, rushed. You can tell exactly how it happened the moment you step inside. But this was the only case where we couldn't find footprints, because whatever broke and never touched the ground. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm a crime scene technician based in a small town just outside Columbus, Ohio. I've been doing this job for a little over 9 years now. It's routine work most days: photograph, document, bag evidence, go home. Nothing you lose, sleep over. I've had a normal life, a small apartment, a younger sister who calls too often, and a habit of working late shifts because it's quieter, less traffic, less noise. That night, I was paired with my usual partner, Marcus. We'd worked dozens of scenes together, robberies, domestic calls, even few things that made the local news. He was the kind of guy who could walk into chaos and still crack a joke just to break the tension. And I remember thinking, as we got the call, this was just going to be another one of those nights. The call came in a little after 2 to 10 a.m. Dispatch flagged it as a standard burglary. Quiet suburban block, no reported injuries. Homeowners out of town for the weekend. The kind of call that usually wraps up before sunrise. Marcus and I didn't rush it. We drove out like we always did. Windows cracked, radio low. The neighborhood was the kind you don't expect trouble in. Clean driveways, trimmed hedges, porch lights left on timers. Everything looked undisturbed. That was the first thing that fell off. The front door was already open when we got there. Not wide, just enough to notice it shouldn't be. The frame had been forced. Clean break near the lock. But there were no splinters scattered across the porch. No signs of a struggle. No panic. Just quiet. We stepped inside. And that's when it stopped making sense. Every drawer in the living room had been pulled out. Not tossed, placed. The couch had been shifted a few inches, perfectly straight, like someone had measured it. Lamps turned at odd angles. Picture frames tilted, but not broken. It looked deliberate, controlled. Marcus checked the usual spots: valuables, electronics, anything easy to grab. Nothing was missing. Not a single thing. Wallets, TV, even loose cash sitting in a bowl by the door. All still there. Then I looked down. Dust covered parts of the hardwood floor, thin, visible under our flashlights. The kind that settles when a house sits empty for a few days. But there were no footprints. Not ours. We had just stepped in. Not the homeowners. Not anyone's. No drag marks. No smudges. No sign that anything had moved across that floor at all. And yet everything had been moved. I remember standing there, trying to make it fit into something logical, something I could write in a report. But nothing did. So let me ask you something. If someone broke into your house and left no trace of how they moved, what would you think? We started documenting everything, like we were trained to. Photos first, angles, positions, distances, the usual process. But the longer we stayed inside, the harder it became to treat it like a normal scene. In the dining room, we found a chair placed on top of the table, not knocked over, set there, balanced perfectly on all four legs, like it had been lowered into position with care. I checked the table surface. No scratches, no drag marks, nothing to suggest it had been pushed or lifted the way a person would do it. Marcus tried to laugh it off, said maybe the homeowners had kids messing around before they left. But even he didn't sound convinced. We kept moving. In the hallway, a floor lamp had been relocated from a corner to the center of the walkway. It was heavy, solid metal base. The kind that leaves marks if you so much as nudge it across hardwood. But the floor beneath it untouched. No lines, no pressure marks. It was like it had never been moved at all. That's when I angled my flashlight upward, and I wish I hadn't. There was dust along the ceiling edges, thin, gray, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. But it wasn't settled the way it should have been. It was disturbed, not in streaks, not like something brushing against it casually, more like impressions. Irregular, spaced out, as if something had made contact up there. Marcus noticed it too. This time he didn't joke. He just stood there, staring, his light following mine. Then he said it, quiet, almost under his breath. Feels like we're not alone in here. I didn't respond, because by then, I was starting to feel it too. Not a sound you could point to, not a shape you could see clearly, just awareness. Like the air had shifted slightly, like something was occupying space it shouldn't. We continued the sweep, room by room, and that's when the smaller things started happening. A bedroom door at the end of the hall moved just a little, not enough to swing open, just a slow, subtle shift. There was no draft. Windows were shut. We both saw it. Neither of us said anything. A few seconds later, I heard something above us. A faint sound. Not footsteps. Something light or uneven. Like pressure being applied, then lifted, then applied again. I looked up again, but there was nothing to see. Just a ceiling. And those same faint disturbances in the dust. And then just for a second, something moved at the edge of my vision. I turned immediately. Nothing there. Marcus asked what I saw. I told him it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, because by that point, one thought had already settled in my mind. Whatever had been inside that house. It didn't walk. It didn't move the way we do. It didn't need the floor at all. It stayed above us. Close enough to hear. Close enough to move things. But never once leaving a trace where we were standing. So let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like something was in the room with you? Even when you were alone? We made our way upstairs. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew that's where the sounds had been coming from. The air felt different up there, heavier, like it had been sitting still for too long. The first bedroom looked untouched, bed made, closet closed, nothing out of place. But the second room, that's where it changed. I raised my flashlight slowly, and the beam settled along the ceiling. At first, it just looked like more disturbed dust. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized they weren't random marks. They had shape, long, narrow impressions spaced unevenly across the ceiling, like fingers, but not human fingers. Too long, too thin, and whatever made them had pressed down just enough to leave an imprint, without breaking the surface. Marcus stepped back. I heard his breath change. Neither of us moved closer. Then, a loud thud came from downstairs. Sharp, sudden, heavy enough to shake the floor beneath us. We both flinched, and then we ran. Down the hallway, down the stairs. Fast, no hesitation. When we got back to the living room, something was wrong. I didn't notice it at first, but Marcus did. The table, he said. I turned. The chair we had documented earlier. The one placed perfectly on top, it wasn't there anymore. It was back on the floor, standing upright, centered in the room, like it had always been there. My chest tightened. We hadn't been gone long. There was no one else in the house. No sound of entry. No exit. Just that change. And then I felt it, right above me. The air shifted, subtle, but enough, like something displaced the space over my head. Cold, but not like a breeze. More like absence. Marcus went completely still. His eyes locked on something above me. And that's when he said it. Quiet. Careful. Don't move, it's right above you. I couldn't look up. I didn't want to confirm it. So I just stood there, listening. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just silence stretching longer than it should. And then, something dropped. Fast. Right in front of us. We both stepped back. Instinct, no thought. But when it hit the floor, there was nothing there. The case was closed 2 days later. Unexplained disturbance. That's what the report said. No suspect. No forced entry beyond the front door. No evidence of anyone ever being inside that house except us. Marcus transferred out a few weeks after. Said he needed a change of pace. We haven't talked about that night since. As for me, I still do the job. Same routine. Same calls. But I don't sleep the same anymore. And when I walk into a scene, I don't check the floors first. I check the ceilings. Every time. because I know what I felt that night. And I know we weren't alone in that house. Most people lock their doors at night. I just don't look up anymore. And the truth is, that wasn't the only case like this. It wasn't the last time something entered a home without ever touching the ground. So tell me, what do you think we were dealing with? And have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Because I'm still trying to understand what we saw that night. My name is Daniel Reyes, and I used to work night shifts at a police station in Ohio. Back then, nights didn't feel like anything special. It was the kind of place where time moved slowly enough that you could hear every clock tick, every pen drop, every chair scrape against the floor. Most of what we did was paperwork, booking reports, filing old case notes, handling routine arrests that came in from the highway or downtown bars when things got messy after midnight. I wasn't alone in that routine. There was Officer Malik, who always drank coffee even when it had gone cold hours ago, and Detective Harris, who had this habit of staring at case files like he expected them to talk back if he looked long enough. That night started like every other night. Quiet, predictable, almost forgettable, until they brought in a man just before 2 a.m. And I remember this clearly because I was sitting behind the glass when I first heard the words that didn't make sense then, and still don't make sense now. I once sat in on an interrogation of a man who, according to records, had been dead for 3 years. There was no reaction at first, no shock, just silence stretching too long, like the room itself was trying to understand what it had just heard. The fluorescent lights above us flickered once, then steadied. Detective Harris didn't look at me when he said it was probably a database error, but I remember thinking, errors don't usually walk into interrogation rooms wearing handcuffs. And I remember something else too. The man sitting on the other side of the glass was calm, too calm, like he wasn't waiting for questions, like he already knew every answer we were about to ask. So I kept watching, and I kept asking myself one question the entire time. If you were in that room, would you stay? They brought him in through the back entrance, just before 2 in the morning. No sirens outside, no struggle, no shouting, nothing like what you'd expect from an arrest that late. It was almost controlled, like he had agreed to come with them. Officer Malik was the one who let him in. I remember Malik's hand resting lightly on the man's arm, not because he was resisting, but because he wasn't doing anything at all. No tension. No fear, no confusion, just calm, too calm. The man's clothes were the first thing that didn't sit right with me. They looked worn in a way I couldn't place. Not dirty in the usual sense, but wrong for the present. Slightly outdated, damp at the edges, like he had been standing somewhere cold and forgotten for too long. His skin was pale under the harsh lights. Not sickly exactly, but drained of anything that made it feel normal. And his eyes, they didn't scan the room like most people do when they're brought into a station. They stayed fixed, not on us, not on anything in front of him, just slightly past us, like we weren't fully there. Detective Harris took over almost immediately. He sat across from the man in interview room 2, sliding a file folder onto the table like it could explain what we were seeing. That was when the first question was asked. "What's your name?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head just slightly, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. Then he spoke. "What time is it?" Harris didn't react. He repeated the question. Again, the same response. "What time is it?" I remember watching Malik shift his weight outside the glass. Even he wasn't comfortable anymore. We ran his prints while the interrogation continued. Nothing matched. Not a single record in the system. When Harris typed the name the man finally gave us, the computer froze for a second longer than it should have. Then it glitched. The screen flickered, and for a moment, a completely different file appeared before disappearing just as fast. CCTV outside the room also distorted at the exact same time. A brief warping of the hallway feed, like the camera forgot what it was supposed to show. Inside the room, the man hadn't moved, still sitting straight, still looking just past us, still calm. And that's when I realized something I couldn't explain then. He hadn't looked directly at a single person since he arrived. Not once. Like he was always focusing on something just behind us, or something waiting on the other side of the room we couldn't see. After a while, Detective Harris stopped asking direct questions. He shifted instead to basics. Where he had been, what he remembered, who he was with. But the answers never came in a straight line. The man spoke slowly, like each memory had to be pulled from somewhere far away. Not like he was thinking, but like he was retrieving fragments of something half-buried. I was near the river. I think the water was higher then. Harris checked notes. There was a storm. The roads were empty. It didn't sound like uncertainty. It sounded like distance. Like time itself wasn't consistent for him. Then something changed. He started mentioning places I knew. Not just general locations, but specific streets. Old cases. Events that had happened years ago. Things that should not have been part of any conversation in that room. Malik leaned closer to me behind the glass. I remember him whispering. He's describing the Miller case. That case had been closed long before I even joined the department. But the man inside the room was talking about it like it was still happening. Like it hadn't ended. Like it was still open somewhere, just not here. Then he stopped speaking mid-sentence and turned his head slightly. Not toward Harris. Not toward Malik. Toward me. And he said my name. Daniel Reyes. No hesitation. No introduction. Just my name. Like he had been holding on to it. How would he know who I was? I hadn't even spoken. Harris froze for the first time that night. He turned toward the glass, like he expected an explanation from us. Malik immediately pulled up the system again. This time faster. Searching names. Cross-checking entry logs. Running everything we had on the man. A few seconds passed. Then the system returned to file. Same name. Same face. But older. Like a photograph left too long in heat. A mugshot appeared on screen. And for a moment, I thought the system had made another mistake. Until I saw the uniform in the image. It was ours. The same station. The same room. Same background wall behind him. The timestamp wasn't recent. It was years old. Then I saw the classification line. Status deceased. Then the next line appeared. Cause of death. In custody. The room went quiet in a way I still can't describe properly. Because there was no sound left to interrupt it. Just that information sitting on the screen. Like it had always been there. Waiting. And then the final detail loaded. Location. Same station. Same interview room. That was when the lights above us flickered for the first time. Once. Then again. The audio recorder on the desk clicked on by itself. But it wasn't recording silence anymore. It was playing voices. Voices we hadn't spoken yet. Harris's voice asking questions before he said them. My breathing before I realized I was holding it. Malik's footsteps shifting out of sync with the present. And inside the room, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, not naturally, all at once. The man didn't move. But I remember seeing something change in the way he sat. Like he was no longer waiting for us to understand. Like he already knew we were behind schedule. Detective Harris didn't hesitate after that. He stood up, grabbed the file from a table, and walked straight to the glass. I remember the way he held it up, like evidence could force reality to behave normally again. He opened the door to interview room 2. That was the first time I felt the room change. Not emotionally, physically. Like stepping into colder air that didn't belong indoors. Harris placed the file on the table in front of the man. For a moment, nothing happened. The man just looked at it, then slowly smiled. It wasn't a natural expression. It looked like something he had forgotten how to do, and just remembered. His eyes lifted slightly, and he spoke. He didn't listen last time either. The moment those words came out, everything started to fail at once. The door lock system clicked, then jammed. Harris turned toward it immediately. The monitor feeds outside the room went black one by one. Camera 1, gone. Camera 2, gone. Hallway feed, gone. Like the station was being erased from the inside out. Malik's voice came through the radio, but it broke into static halfway through a sentence. The man inside the room didn't react to any of it. He just leaned back, slightly, like he was finally comfortable. Then he started talking again, but this time it wasn't vague. It was precise. He began describing what happened to him, not in general terms, in detail. The cold of the room, the sound of the chair scraping, the way the lights flickered before everything went wrong. Harris stepped closer, demanding answers, but the man ignored him completely now. He turned his head slowly, scanning the room like he was remembering each corner. Then he pointed, not at Harris, not at me, at a spot on the floor near the corner of the room. And he said, that's where I died, right there. I didn't understand it at first, but then something clicked, something I wish had never clicked. There was an old case file buried in the system archives. Well, nobody talked about anymore. A suspect, a death in custody, a malfunction in interview room 2, official report sealed, internal review never released, and every detail he was describing matched it exactly. Harris stepped back from the table. For the first time, he didn't have anything to say. And that's when I saw it. The man's skin, it was changing. Not all at once. Slowly at first. Darkening around the wrists. Bruising forming along the neck. Like something underneath was remembering how it ended. Like the room itself was correcting him, forcing him back into a moment that never finished. He didn't look afraid. He looked familiar with it. Like this wasn't the first time it was happening. Like it had happened before. And we were only now catching up to it. And then everything shut off. The power in the entire station dropped at once. No lights, no monitors, no radio. Just darkness pressing in from every side. I remember standing there, not moving, because I couldn't tell if moving was safe anymore. Then the emergency lights flickered back on, and the room was empty. The man was gone, but the chair was still warm, and the handcuffs on the table were still locked. No one ever explained it properly. The report that followed only said, system error, no suspect processed. That was it. No names, no footage, no explanation. I quit 2 weeks later, but sometimes late at night, I still hear it. That same voice, close enough that it feels like it's right behind me. What time is it? Do you think he was a ghost or something worse? What really happened in that room? Because there are other cases like this, things that never made it into official records. If you want me to tell you what I found in the old files, hit subscribe and tell me, would you have stayed in that room? I didn't believe in impossible cases until I stood under the old rail bridge outside a quiet town in Ohio, watching a body get pulled from the shallow water below. My name is a matter of record at the county office forensic assistant, working alongside Detective Harris and my friend Maya back in records, where all the identities, fingerprints, and reports are supposed to make sense of the dead. That night, the call came in like any other. Unnamed male, possible drowning. No ID on site. We've handled cases like that before, where someone is just forgotten by the world. I remember the way the air felt under that bridge, heavy and still, like even the river wasn't willing to move. The victim looked young, early 20s, face partially submerged, clothing plain enough to belong to anyone. Nothing stood out at first. Nothing that should have made this case different from the rest. We bagged evidence, ran the initial scan, and sent fingerprints through the system, while Harris made notes beside me. Maya stayed back at the station, already preparing the database entry. Everything was routine, mechanical, almost too calm for what we were looking at. Then the first report came back. The system didn't just fail to identify him. It identified him as someone else entirely. We arrived at the scene just after sunrise, but the light didn't feel like morning. It felt muted, like it was struggling to reach the ground beneath that old rail bridge. The air was cold in a way that didn't match the season. Still enough that even the river below seemed to move quieter than it should. The victim was already laid out on the bank when we got there. Male, early 20s. No wallet, no phone, no identification. No signs of struggle that made sense. No obvious cause of death at first glance. But what caught my attention wasn't what he had. It was what he carried on his wrist. A faint mark burned into the skin. Not fresh, not fully healed either. A shape that didn't match any known medical tag or branding we had seen in prior cases. It was too precise to be random. We did what we always do. Gloves on. Photos first. Then fingerprint lifts. Facial scan. Everything logged, step by step, while Harris documented the scene, and I entered the preliminary report into the system. At first, everything responded like normal. The database accepted the entry. The facial recognition processed without error. Even the fingerprints matched nothing in the system, which wasn't unusual for an unidentified case. We tagged him as John Doe, pending identification, and moved the body for transport. It wasn't until 2 hours later, back at the station, that the first update came through. The system flagged the file automatically. No one had touched it. No one had edited it. But the identity field had changed. The name was no longer unknown. It was a full match to a living person. A man with a recorded address, a job history, a driver's license photo that matched the face on our slab. We thought it was a glitch. Maya even laughed nervously over the radio, saying the system needed maintenance. Then Harris leaned closer to the screen, his voice dropping lower than I'd ever heard it. He didn't look confused. He looked frozen, because the name on the file wasn't random. It was his cousin. We didn't speak for a full minute after Harris said the name. It just sat there on the screen, clean, confirmed, impossible to argue with. Maya broke the silence first over the intercom, asking us to rerun the identification protocol. Her voice was steady, but I could hear something underneath it, a tightness she couldn't hide. So we did it again, and that's when the second layer of wrongness began. The face on the digital file didn't stay still anymore. On one refresh, it matched the body on the table exactly. On the next, the jawline shifted slightly, different structure, older appearance, unfamiliar eyes. We thought the monitor was lagging. We checked the raw capture feed. It wasn't lagging. It was changing. We pulled height measurements from the scan system. 6 feet 1 inch. We rechecked the calibration. 6 feet. Then 5 feet 11. Back to 6'1" again. As if the system couldn't decide what he had been when he was alive. Dental records were worse. The chart generated, then erased itself, then rebuilt with different filling, different alignments, different prior procedures, none of which matched the same set twice. Maya went quiet on the other end of the radio. Then she said something I still can't forget. She said, "The file is updating on its own." We pulled security footage from the bridge camera next. What we saw made Harris step back from the screen. The recording showed the body, still there, but not staying the same, frame by frame. The person on the bridge was different. A man in a hoodie, then a man in a suit, then a teenager, then someone older, someone injured, someone we couldn't even classify properly before it shifted again. And the timestamps weren't moving forward. They were rewriting themselves. That's when Maya called back, but her voice wasn't steady anymore. She said she had gone down to the morgue to verify something in person. She said she needed to see him again. Then she stopped mid-sentence. A long silence followed. Then her voice came back, lower. She said she saw his eyes move. We told her to step out immediately, but she insisted she wasn't imagining it. She said the body had blinked. Just once. Slow. Deliberate. Harris and I went down together after that. The morgue lights felt colder than before. The air inside didn't move right, like the ventilation had forgotten how to work. The body was still on the table, covered partially by a sheet, everything as it should have been. Except it wasn't. The tag beside him had changed again. A new identity appeared on the screen above the table. A missing person report from a nearby town. A name I recognized from briefing files. A case that had been closed weeks ago. Harris stared at it like it might correct itself if he looked long enough. And then dispatch came over the radio. They told us to stop, not because of a system error, not because of confusion, because the missing person we were now linked to was already accounted for, alive, officially, verified, seen earlier that morning. There was a pause on the line before they added something no one was supposed to say out loud. They told us the case never existed. We went back to the morgue immediately after dispatch's last message. But nobody spoke during the walk down the corridor. Even our footsteps sounded wrong, too soft, like the building was trying not to acknowledge us. When we pushed the doors open, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The second was the empty table. The body was gone. No forced entry. No disturbance. No sign of movement that made sense in a secured room with locked access and camera coverage. But the stretcher was still there, perfectly aligned. And when I placed my hand near it, it was warm, not room temperature. Warm, like something had only just been there. The monitors above the table began to flicker the moment we stepped inside. At first, it was small glitches. Then the system restarted itself. Then it started cycling files without input. One name appeared, then another, then another. Student, officer, missing child, a man who had died the previous year in another county, then someone from our own department, an analyst we had just seen that morning. Each identity flashed for less than a second. But every one of them came with a face, real, documented, stored, until it wasn't. The machine was rewriting reality faster than we could track it. Harris grabbed my arm, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because we both saw the final update appear at the same time. One line, one confirmation, identity, Detective Harris. We turned instantly. He was already there, standing near the doorway, too still to be natural, like he had been placed there rather than walked there. His eyes weren't focused on us. They were focused slightly past us, like he was trying to recognize the room itself. I called his name. He blinked slowly. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. I don't remember coming here. The lights cut out before either of us could respond. Total darkness. No sound. No machines. Just absence. When the emergency power kicked in, it didn't come back cleanly. It stuttered like it was afraid to fully activate. The room was different. The stretcher was still there. But now there were bodies on the floor. 3 of them. One was Harris. One was Maya. And the third, I didn't want to look at it, but I did, because it had my shape. And beside it, neatly placed like it had always belonged there, was a new name tag. Mine. I'm writing this from what they call a secured facility, though I've started to question what secured even means anymore. They told me I survived that night in the morgue, that I was recovered in shock, confused, and alone. But I've reviewed my own file, and even that isn't stable. Every hour it changes. Sometimes I'm listed as the victim from the bridge. Sometimes I'm listed as the forensic assistant on duty. Sometimes there is no record of me at all. No birth file. No employment history. Nothing. And the strangest part is the symbol. The same mark we saw on that wrist under the bridge is now appearing in official reports. Cases I've never worked on. Places I've never been. Names I don't recognize but feel like I should. If you've ever looked at a case file and felt like something didn't belong, tell me in the comments. Because I need to know I'm not the only one watching this change. Like and subscribe if you want part 2. Next time, I'll show you what they never pulled out from underneath that bridge. But be careful, because now it doesn't stay in one place, and it might already have your name. I still can't explain how a call described Officer Daniels' death with absolute precision, every movement, every sound, every second of it, as if someone had stood inside the moment itself and recorded it from the inside out, while he was still alive, still on duty, still speaking on the radio just minutes away from me. That night began like any other shift, monitors glowing, radios humming, the usual noise of a city that never fully sleeps. Nothing suggested that anything was wrong. Nothing suggested that time itself was about to feel misaligned. But then the call came through, not through the emergency line like normal. It bypassed everything, like it was never meant to be intercepted. And the voice on the other end didn't sound rushed, didn't sound confused. It sounded certain. Tell me, how does a description of a man's final moments arrive? Before those moments have even begun? I work as a 911 dispatch operator in a mid-sized city in the United States, somewhere between Ohio and Pennsylvania, where the nights are long, quiet, and usually uneventful unless someone decides otherwise. My shift starts the same way every time. Same chair, same glowing screens, same radio chatter faintly bleeding through the speakers, like background noise that never really turns off. I work alongside Mia. She's been here longer than I have. She jokes too much during slow hours, like she's trying to convince the room nothing can go wrong just by saying it out loud. And then there's Captain Reeves, supervisor, strict voice, always watching everything without saying much at all. We all knew Officer Daniels. Everyone did. Calm voice on the radio. Experienced, never rushed. The kind of officer you trusted to handle a call without needing backup unless something truly went wrong. And nights like that night were supposed to be normal. Domestic disputes, false alarms, someone calling because they heard footsteps that turned out to be their own house settling. The usual rhythm of a city half asleep. We were used to strange calls that made no sense in the moment, but always found an explanation by morning. But nothing prepared us for that night. The room was quiet in a way that didn't feel comfortable. The fluorescent lights above us hummed without pause, rain tapped against the windows in a steady pattern. And the radios kept their soft, constant static, like the city was breathing through wires. And for a while, everything felt like it was waiting. Have you ever worked a night shift where everything felt off? Like the air itself knew something was about to happen and refused to say it out loud? It was just after the routine reports when the phone rang. Not the emergency line, not the radio, but the direct dispatch line. The one that almost never rings unless something has already gone wrong inside the system itself. I remember glancing at the screen first. Caller ID, unknown, out of area. No number, no traceable origin. Just those words sitting there like they belonged. I picked it up, and at first there was only silence. Then a voice came through. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It didn't sound like someone calling for help or reporting a crime. It sounded controlled, like it had been prepared long before the call was made. And the voice began describing Officer Daniels. Route 19. Traffic stop. Black sedan pulled slightly off the shoulder. No hesitation. No guessing. Every detail delivered like it had already been witnessed. The voice said Daniels would step out of his cruiser, approach the vehicle slowly, hand resting near his belt, but not yet drawing his weapon. And then it continued. A sudden struggle inside the driver's side window. Gunfire, short, close, immediate. Daniels collapsing near the roadside ditch, just far enough from the headlights that no one would see him clearly at first. I remember looking at Mia when it said that, because none of it had happened. There was no report, no radio chatter, nothing. But the voice didn't stop. It added one final detail, almost like it was finishing a sentence it had already written somewhere else. He will try to call for help, but the radio will only scream back at him. Silence followed immediately after that. Mia let out a short laugh, the kind people use when they're uncomfortable and trying to make reality feel lighter than it is. Is this some kind of prank? She asked, half whispering, half joking. But no one answered her, because the strange part wasn't just what was being said, it was how calm it sounded, like whoever was on the other and wasn't predicting anything at all. like they were reading from something already written line by line. Without a single mistake, it happened without warning. The radio system crackled to life, cutting through the silence in the room like it had been forced open from the other side. Officer Daniels' voice came through. Clear, calm, routine. Traffic stop initiated. Route 19. Black sedan pulled over on the shoulder. I remember freezing for a moment because those exact words matched what we had just been told over the phone. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, a routine stop, something we hear dozens of times a week. But then the details started aligning. Daniels pulled behind the same black sedan the caller described. He stepped out. Slow movement, controlled posture, exactly as the voice on the phone had said earlier. And at that same moment, the caller didn't go quiet. The phone line stayed open, and the voice on the other end continued describing everything in real time, as if it were watching through Daniel's eyes or standing somewhere just behind him. He's approaching the driver's side now, the voice said, and on the radio, Daniels confirmed he was approaching the vehicle. Step by step, the two feeds began to mirror each other. His hand is near his belt, but he won't draw yet, the caller continued. And Daniels matched it exactly. I felt my throat tighten, because this wasn't guessing anymore. This was synchronization. Then something worse happened. The caller began predicting interference. You'll hear static in 3 seconds, the voice said. We all looked at the radio. 1, 2, 3. Static burst through the speakers. Mia stopped breathing for a second. Supervisor Reeves was already standing behind us. He took the headset off the console and ordered a trace immediately. The response came back almost instantly. No origin, no network source, no routing history, as if the call wasn't traveling through any system we understood, just existing. Mia leaned closer to me, her voice barely above a whisper. We're hearing a ghost report a live event, she said. I wanted to disagree with her. I wanted to say it was interference, a technical loop, anything that made sense. But the room didn't feel like it was operating under normal rules anymore. The rain outside grew heavier, striking the windows harder, faster, like it was reacting to something happening on the other end of that road. And then the lights above us flickered once. Just once. But it was enough to make everyone in the room look up at the same time. Because nothing about that flicker felt random. And the worst part was, we were still listening, still watching, still connected, even though every instinct was telling us to cut the line completely. So I have to ask you, if you were sitting there, hearing your reality echoed back to you before it happened, would you keep listening or hang up immediately? It started collapsing in real time. The radio didn't just transmit anymore, it fought itself. Officer Daniels' voice broke through first, still calm, still procedural. But something had changed in it. Breathing heavier, shorter sentences, distance closing in too fast. Then came movement, struggle sounds, a sharp impact against metal, someone shouting, Daniels, then another voice we couldn't place. And through it all, the phone line stayed open. But the voice on the phone wasn't describing it anymore. It was closer, not metaphorically, not emotionally, closer, like it had moved from the speaker into the room with us. Mia stepped back from her console. I remember her hand shaking slightly near the keyboard, like she was deciding whether pulling the plug would even matter anymore. On the radio, Daniels was losing control of the scene. Dispatch, I've got. Static swallowed half a sentence, then chaos. A sudden burst of sound, movement, panic. Something crashing hard enough to distort the transmission. And in the same moment, the phone voice stopped describing. It simply said nothing, as if it was waiting. Then, a gunshot exploded through the radio speakers. Everything froze in that instant. No talking, no movement, only a sharp, ringing silence that felt louder than everything before it. I remember staring at the console, waiting for the next transmission. Because even after something like that, protocol makes you wait. 3 seconds passed, then 4. And that's when we heard it. A faint breath. Daniel's still alive. Barely. And then his voice came through the radio one last time. Broken. Close to the ground. Barely above a whisper. They were already here. Silence followed immediately. The line dropped. The radio went dead. And the phone disconnected instantly. No warning tone. No fade out. Just gone. Mia checked the call log. Her face changed before she even spoke. Duration, 0 seconds. No incoming number. No record in the system. No trace that the call had ever existed at all. We were in every diagnostic we had. Checked backups. Checked redundancy logs. 10 times over. Nothing. But we all heard it. We all heard every second of it. And Officer Daniels survived that night. But after that whisper, he never spoke again. Not on the radio. Not to dispatch. Not to anyone. And that's the part that still doesn't make sense to me. Because if the call never existed, then what exactly did we answer? So tell me this. Who makes a call about a death that hasn't happened yet? And why does it feel like every time you think about it, something is still listening from the other end? If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, write it in the comments, because next time it might not be just a call. In the next story, I'll tell you what happened when our dispatch system started receiving calls from numbers belonging to people who haven't been born yet.